Hello everyone, my name is Ian Cherry, and in today's session, what we'll be going over is how to let workflow intelligence improve your contract management. In today's session, we will learn the basics about workflow and how workflow can be used to improve your business processes with automated rule-based task alerts. In our session today, what we'd like to go over is how we can create or use a simple workflow to initiate a software contract review. In order to get to the workflow manager, we'll first navigate up to the setup menu and then click on the workflow manager. Now, when creating a new workflow, you'd of course come over to the Actions toolbar and create the Add New Workflow button. But in today's session, for simplicity, we're going to use an existing workflow that I've already set up called a Software Agreement Initial Review. To review an already created workflow or edit a created workflow, we just simply click the View Edit button on this toolbar. So when first creating or reviewing a workflow, we first want to make sure that we have the right module installed or the right module selected. So for our module today, since we are creating a contract review workflow, we would want the module to be contract details. The module can be changed, of course, when you select or create a new workflow by selecting one of the modules from our list here. You can then give the workflow a name. We chose Software Agreement Initial Review. And typically what we like to do with workflow steps like this is give them a name that's going to reflect the action or the task that they're possibly creating. In this sense, since the workflow is going to be creating an initial review, that is what we named it. In order to activate or use a workflow, we can simply put the active to yes. To deactivate a workflow, we can change this option to be no. When creating workflow, one of the important factors that we're going to have to look at is if the contract record or the record in question is going to be updated in order to match our criteria. If that's going to be the case, then we need to make sure that our run job on update is set to yes. What this does is let the system know that the record in question that we will be using this task or workflow on will be updated to match our criteria that we're going to set in a moment. For beginning workflow modules, these 4 fields are all you will need in order to create a basic workflow and to create rule-based task alerts. On a creation of a workflow, there will be a save and continue option at the bottom where we can press in order to save these options. Once saved, we can then move on to the Conditions tab to let the workflow know what criteria we need the contract record or whichever record to have in order for this workflow to activate. So in our existing workflow, we already have 2 conditions that we want the workflow to activate based on. The first being the contract type, being a software agreement. What this means is that when a contract is put into the system, if it is not equal to a software agreement, this workflow will not activate. Our second condition is the status. In our workflow, we want the status of the contract record, or whichever record, to be pending. So if the contract record does not have a status ID of 40 or a status of pending, then this workflow will not activate. So in order for this workflow to activate, we have to have both of these conditions active and present on that record in order for it to work. To add a new condition, we're going to come down to the Add Condition button. We will then select a field that we'd like to add a condition to. So let's say, for example, type. Then we can select from our list of types, in our example, software agreement, then select the Save button to then add that criteria to our list. Once we have all of our conditions, we can then move on to the task section, which is actually going to create the task that's going to roll onto the record and send the alert to that user. So we'll click on the task button. And because this is a pre-created workflow, we already have a task set up. So let's go over the different aspects of this task in order to see what the actual task is to do. So the first portion of a task that you're going to want to do is assign it to a user. In the employee sections field here, we can choose from a list of users. These users are the ones that are currently marked as active in our system, and any user can be selected for these tasks. You also have additional dynamic tasks or employee users that can be used to set up when you're not exactly sure who it's supposed to go to. So for example, the employee field here, if this value is set, means that whoever that person is assigned to this record will be the one that is assigned to this task. So it allows you to dynamically assign a person to a record, even if you don't know who that person is yet. If also needed, you can additionally assign groups to your workflow task. in order to add additional people or members of your team that need to also review or do whatever this task has in mind. In our note description, in our task name area, we'd first give a name to this task. This is what the user will see when they are alerted in their email saying, hey, you need to do said action. Then we can give them a description of that said action down here in the description area. This area is a rich text editor field, so you can add things like color coordination, bolding, italicization, underlining, and bullet and numbering. The next thing you're going to do is set up the task start and end date. So first things first, our first column is the number of days that this task is supposed to last. Then we choose whether or not it's before or after another date field in our system. So in our example, what we've done is we've created a task that is going to start immediately after the date entered and is going to end 3 days after that record's been entered. So this task is a total of 3 days. Now, additionally, out of the box, tasks only send one alert. They send an alert when the task is due. So if you would like your users to be notified before their task is due or at the start of their task, for example, we need to set up our notification tab located in this column here, this row here. See how this notification email bar is set for 3. So this reads that send a notification email 3 days before the task end date set above. So by setting this to 3, that means this task will send an alert out at the beginning of its cycle, and then it will send another one when it is finished. We can additionally set up recurrences if we want this task to recur multiple times between now and that contract's end date. We can also set up an escalation if the task hasn't been completed in a number of days, whether that be immediately or several days after. We can set up a notification to escalate that task to another user. One of the important sections of the beginner workflow section is the ability to create a task that is either complete or autocomplete or not autocomplete. In this example, because we want our user to actually do an action, we want them to actually review the contract, we are not going to set this contract or this task up as an autocomplete task. We are going to allow it to stay action-based, so that way the user can complete their task and let us know that they've actually done what we've instructed in the task section to do. Once you've then set up those initial sections, you'll then have the ability to save the task. Once a task is saved, you'll then have the ability to add what's called a field update. So a field update allows us to update the status or any field of a record with the Workflow Manager tool, marking a task as complete or rejected or any other type of task status. So in our example, we have that when the task is complete, we want the contract to update the status to item number 43, which is to move it to the next step, which is finance review. In order to add a status update, we're going to hit the Add Update button, choose when we want the status to update or when we want the item to update, in this case, our status. So we're going to say on task complete, we would like the status field to update, and they chose finance review. So we would simply put update, and then what that will read is that when the task is completed, the system will update the status field on that record to finance review, indicating it's ready for the next step. Once we're finished, we simply hit the Save Task just to make sure that our field updates have been captured. And now for our workflow portion, the beginner part, we have finished our workflow task. And now we can test by trying or creating a new contract record. So we'll go to the contract section up here. We'll click on Add New Record. We'll then choose our software agreement. We'll name our contract here. And then what we're going to do here is just fill in some basic test information in order for us to get to our next section. And we're just going to fill out our necessary fields here for testing so that way we can see if our workflow actually activates. So when testing your workflow, you want to pay attention to some key things. First of all, we have our criteria in which we want our workflow to activate. It needs to be a software agreement and it needs to be pending. So when we are testing, we want to make sure that our contract that we're testing on matches our criteria in order to see if our workflow will activate. So we can see here that our contract type is a software agreement and our status is pending. So we can navigate down to the task section. If we want to quickly navigate to that task section, we'll click on the task and email section here. And then we'll see that our task has been created here. And so now if we were to view this task, John Smith has the task to create or do a software agreement initial review. He can then click on this task to view, review what he needs to do, follow those appropriate steps, and then click on complete and approve task. So after completing that task, we have an example of how we can create a sample initial review task for our contracts. Now that's creating a task that requires an action on that user's behalf. So the user has to come in and complete that action and complete that task. Now we should create a task using the autocomplete feature to show us how we can create a very simple alert with rule-based task to give, let's say, some kind of submission workflow task alert. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an autocomplete task using the same type of criteria, but we're going to make the task a little bit different with our autocomplete. So what we're going to do is navigate back to our workflow section. To get there, once again, we go to setup, then we come down to the workflow manager. We'll click on the add new workflow button. We will choose our module, give our name. So we'll call this a software submission alert. We will set our alert to active, and we will have run job on update set to yes. From here, we'll hit save and continue. Now we'll set up our conditions. First, we will add our contract type, software, and then we will add our status. And pending, and we'll hit save. So our conditions match our prior workflow just for familiarity, but you are not limited to just these two type of conditions. You can create workflow with using a different type or a different status if need be. Now we'll go to our task section. Since this is a new workflow, we'll create our task from scratch. So what we'll do first is create or assign our employee. We'll just choose our employee. This way, dynamically, whoever it is that's assigned to this contract or whoever puts that record in will get this task alert, and we won't have to worry about going back and make sure the proper person is assigned. We'll call this new software agreement submitted. Then we'll give our instructions. Okay, lets us know that a new software agreement has been submitted, and that will be the details that the user will receive. Now we'll set our task date to be the same, just for familiarity. And we'll keep the same settings for our other section of the workflow as well. The only difference between this workflow and the last one is now we're going to indicate that our autocomplete workflow is actually, instead of no, we're going to say yes. What this does is this allows the workflow tool to be used in order to send alerts out that don't necessarily need any action behind them. What we're saying with this is that the user just needs to acknowledge that this has happened and that we just want to alert them that something has been happening. So this kind of alert or task will be very useful for users that are not going to be in the system, but still need to be aware of what's going on. So let's say, for example, a CEO, a CFO, or some executive or someone like that. After we've chosen that we want to have the autocomplete turned on, we then need to choose when that autocomplete is actually going to happen. The first can be after a notification or when this initial alert is sent, or it can be on the task end date. So in this situation, the task would autocomplete 3 days later. We're going to choose after notification because we want that autocomplete to happen immediately after we've created the contract record. Then we're going to just hit Save Task for our beginner section. Now the task is saved. We can go and choose to add a field update, but since this is a non-actionable and just an alert-based task, we're not going to set a field update for this example. But if you wanted to, you could go up to the Manage section and navigate down here to the Field Update section, and then proceed to add a field update based on what your organization's needs would be. So now that we've done this, hit the Save for good measure, and then we'll go test. So what we'll do, we'll add a new contract, and we're going to follow the same rules. So we'll make sure that our contract is a software agreement first, so that if it's one of our criteria, in our contract, counterparty, leave our status and our legal department as the department selected here at test, and we'll fill in our date. Save and continue. Once again, once we've hit continue, we can either scroll down to our task section, or we can click the task and email section on the toolbar to navigate down there quickly. And there we can see both of our workflow have activated, both our manual action item task as well as our autocomplete task. So let's look at some key takeaways about this lesson. First and foremost, workflow is a powerful tool that allows you to set rule-based tasks and can be very useful for when you need to set up certain scenarios in order to send alerts based on those said scenarios, and not have to be there all the time in order to set those or make sure those alerts actually happen. When creating workflow, it's great to keep in mind that we can dynamically set up which employee a workflow is assigned to by choosing one of our employee dynamic fields at the bottom here. So you can choose who the employee that entered it, that employee's manager, who entered it, the employee that's assigned, and who updated that record, as well as the employee's manager if need be. Also, when setting up task alerts, it is key to keep in mind that tasks do not send an alert on the start of a task, but typically only on the end. And in order for us to have an alert at the beginning of a task, we need to make sure that we are filling in this notification bar in order for us to get those task alerts. Finally, when utilizing task and workflow, we can use field updates to help us move pieces and steps along with the contract or our data flow process. In your advanced lesson, we're going to learn a little bit more about how we can move a task or a contract from step 1 to step 2 using advanced features in workflow utilizing field updates. This concludes our lesson on beginner workflow. Hopefully you will be able to use that information in order to better understand your contracts and better utilize the Contract Insight application.